Catherine ASMR, and today I'm really excited to be doing another video where I talk about books and use those books to make lovely sounds to relax to or sleep. But mainly I'm just looking forward to sitting here with you and talking about these books in whispered and soft-spoken voice, because that remains one of my all-time favourite triggers. But I'll also use book triggers because books are just inbuilt ASMR tools in my opinion. Just the sound of the pages turning. But I'll tell you about each of them. I've got a collection of fiction, non-fiction and collections, I guess, which are also, actually one of them's not non-fiction. I was about to describe it as one, but actually that's a good into the first book, which is the Penguin book of classical myths. And I don't really know how to describe this because it's a collection of stories, but it's not exactly fiction. But I think most people would say that it's definitely not non-fiction either. But this is just a collection of Greek myths, and I've always had a passing interest in Greek mythology. True, but I've never prioritised the time to devote to actually getting into it. I've always read something else. But I'm actually kind of thinking about reading through these myths because it starts from creation, and then goes on to gods, which is the second chapter, and then the first humans and the quest for the golden fleece. I don't know what that is. I imagine that some of you will be like, you don't know what the quest for the golden fleece is. But as much as I find Greek history and Greek myths interesting, I really have not spent any time learning it. It's just I enjoy things that are based on Greek myths, I guess. But I was thinking about potentially doing a series on here where I read through the classical myths. I actually really like that sound of when your finger gets slightly stuck to the cover and it pulls off. So the next book I have, and I'm really sorry I'm getting a little bit sweaty because yet again it is summer in the UK, and although they are famously mild, it is not mild when you live inside a metal box, because the place that I live is a rehabilitated shipping container, so I mean it's great, it keeps the heat in, but maybe a bit too much when you have a ring light. But anyway, the next book I will talk about is The Poppy War. And what drew me to this initially was that it was a fantasy with like dystopian elements, and the thing is I love fantasy, but a lot of the stories that I'm drawn to, the writing puts me off, and the characters, the way the characters are written put me off. They feel quite 2D. Obviously not all fantasy, but I feel like fantasy is a very saturated market and there's a huge demand, and I feel like a lot of fantasy readers are not as fussy, which is definitely not a bad thing. I wish that I wasn't so fussy about the writing. I could enjoy way more books. That is a fault of my character, not a reflection on anyone else's reading taste. But this is just intelligently written. There's not too much, there's not too little of anything. And at first, and I do this often with a lot of books, if I'm not 100% sure, or perhaps if I have a long to be read pile, I will buy the books that I'm interested in for my dad for Father's Day or for his birthday, because my dad is someone who's really difficult to buy for. Well, he's not, it's just that everyone else gets him things that he actually doesn't want. But one thing that he always does want is books, because he uses it to get to sleep. And without fail, he'll be reading for like half an hour to an hour, sometimes even an hour and a half a night, just to get him to sleep. And he literally never reads outside of that time. But it means he gets through books so that by the time the next holiday rolls around, it's time for me to buy him some more. And he gave this his stamp of approval, and that's always a positive for me. Sometimes he'll like a book that I have not liked, but it happens rarely, usually. If he finds something annoying, I also find it annoying. But if I find something annoying, he doesn't necessarily always find it annoying. But this is just a great book, genuinely 5 out of 5 stars. I will read the blurb because it will do a better job of describing it than I would. When Rin aced the Kedju, the test to find the most talented students in the Nakara Empire, it was a shock to everyone. That she got into Sinagard, the most elite military school in Nikan, was even more surprising. But surprises aren't always good. Because being a dark-skinned peasant girl from the south is not an easy thing at Sinagard. Fighting the prejudice of rival classmates, Rin discovers that she possesses a lethal, unearthly power, an aptitude for the nearly mythical art of shamanism. Rin learns that gods long thought dead are very much alive, and that mastering these powers could mean more than just surviving school. For while the Empire is at peace, the Federation of Mugen still lurks across the narrow sea. The Federation occupied Nikan for decades after the First Poppy War, and only barely lost the continent in the second. And while most people calmly go about their lives, a few are aware that a third Poppy War is just a spark away. And yes, this was a 5 out of 5 on Goodreads, although I haven't updated Goodreads on a while, and this is not on my Goodreads. But yeah, I love this book. I've had it pointed out to me that I just love anything that is set in a school or academy or a university or any kind of educational institution. And I think I just like the competitiveness and the camaraderie and the fact that you're using hard work in order to be your best self kind of thing. I think that trope just really appeals to me. Okay, so the third book that we have is Junk DNA by Nessa Carey. And junk DNA makes up 98% of our genome. So when we're talking about our genes, like, they're the important part of our DNA that everyone talks about, but that's only 2%, so that's all of the protein coding functions, and proteins are in every single cell in our body. Enzymes are proteins, and enzymes carry out all of the chemical reactions going on in our body. Hormones are proteins, all of that stuff. But the genes themselves that code for the proteins, they only make up 2% of DNA material, and the other 90% was not written off as useless, but generally ignored for quite a while, and then it came out that junk DNA, the 98% had all these other uses, but some of it very much is junk. I can say that just because genetic material in terms of the size of a genome and the amount of genetic material we have doesn't really correlate well to the size and complexity of an organism. And there are a lot of things that can happen in DNA, like duplication, where DNA material is just randomly duplicated and then inserted elsewhere, and usually that isn't beneficial. Usually it just kind of adds to the junk. But there's a lot of junk DNA that we talk about as junk, which actually has very vital functions. It's just that they're not coding for proteins. So I will read the back of this because it will be able to tell you more about the uses than I can. For decades, 98% of our DNA was written off as junk on the grounds that it did not code for proteins. I could have just read this from the beginning, really, couldn't I? From rare genetic diseases to Down syndrome, from viral infections to the aging process, only now are the effects and the vital functions of these junk regions beginning to emerge. Scientists' rapidly growing knowledge of this often controversial field has already provided a successful cure for blindness and saved innocent people from death row via DNA fingerprinting, and looks set to revolutionize treatment for many medical conditions, including obesity. So I will share a secret with you. I have never read the entirety of this all the way through. Oh, here's my folded page. Because I read it really kind of in depth, and then something in life interrupts me, so I've probably only read up to half of the way, which is actually better than I thought. But I've read it up to halfway twice, because I don't want to just jump back into it, because I don't think there's much point. I think it's better to know the stuff you know really well than to know all of something slightly. So every time I go back to read it, I start from the beginning, because otherwise you're just basically reading to finish a book, because you've forgotten the context of everything going forward. From what I remember though, it was very interesting and very entertaining. Okay, so the next book I have on my list is, and this is a big one, as you can probably tell from the strain of my arms as I lifted it. This is Beauty and the Beast, and this book is a collection of fairy tales which are split up into the beauty trope and the beast trope. So I love the sound of the edges. Oh my gosh, I think I asked this on my last video, or the video before that, but I was like, does anyone know what these edges are called? I think they're sprayed edges, right? That's what they're officially called. thank you to whoever corrected me on that last time. Oh, it's just beautiful. But anyway, back to showing you how it's split up. Oh my gosh, that's gorgeous. You would think that I haven't actually read any of the stories in here, but I have. I'm just not observant unless it's the thing that I'm specifically looking for. So if I'm wanting to find a story, I'll go straight to the story and I won't notice anything on the journey there. I remember when I was younger, I walked into the living room, kitchen sort of area, and the whole wall is glass, so you've got basically the total view into the garden that you could get, that anyone could get. And this thing called the summer house, which is really just a glorified shed, had been destroyed, and it looked like there'd been a war happening, and that was kind of the shrapnel that had just been everywhere. I just didn't notice it at all when I walked into the room. I was just focused on getting my orange juice from the fridge, and then my dad was like, "Do you notice anything?" And I was like, and then he turned me around and then I saw. But this is so lovely, my goodness. I can't believe that I didn't notice this, because usually I notice beauty. I genuinely want to live here. I really do. Like, I want to be there right now. Oh, it's beautiful. Now, third time to show you how the book is split up. So it's split into beauties, and this includes, before beauties, there's the actual story of Beauty and the Beast, which comes first, which I have read from this book. It's very, very different to the Disney movie, as all fairy tales are. They're all so much darker and gorier, really. But the Disney film is my favourite Disney film. And then there's so many here which I have never heard of, like the story of Kiku, and the story of the Queen of the Flowery Isles. I might read that tonight before bed, because the Flowery Isles looks like that could be it, really. It really does. And the Satin Surgeon sounds kind of ominous, but then there are ones that we know of, like the story of Pretty Goldilocks and Rumpelstiltskin. I'm surprised that's it under Beauties, to be honest, although it's more like Beauty and the Beast, to be honest. And then there's Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty. Oh my gosh, that's my name, Catherine and Her Destiny. I'm gonna have to read that one tonight to see what I get up to. And then we've got Beasts, and it's the Dragon of the North, appropriate, and then the White Cat, not appropriate. Green Monkey, Colony of Cat. Oh, so it's not like beasts as in horrible people. I suppose that kind of makes sense. It's talking about beasts as in creatures of all kinds. Oh, I like that more, because it's more fun to read about animals than it is about villains just constantly, for that many stories at least. Let's see if there's any more beautiful artwork in the back. Yes, there is, but it's the same picture. Okay, there's a really nice picture at the back of here as well. That looks like it could be Aladdin, right? But I didn't actually see Aladdin in there. So the fourth book is the Corfu trilogy, and for anyone who doesn't know who Gerard Durrell is, which is probably most people watching this, he was in his time a kind of naturalist, not to be confused with naturist, that rivaled David Attenborough, and I'm guessing that most of you do know who he is. Or maybe that's my English bias, but if you don't know who David Attenborough is, then he's very much, if you asked a British person who the national treasure was, I think most of them would probably say David Attenborough. He does all of the nature documentaries. And so Gerard Durrell in his time was kind of up there with David Attenborough. They were contemporaries. But obviously David Attenborough is like 98 now, so he outlived him, and you know, that's many more years to build up a career. And also I don't think Gerard Durrell was as much into the TV as David Attenborough was, but his influence was very great also. So what this is a memoir of Gerard Durrell's days as an English child growing up in Greece, because his mum basically just up and moved the whole family to Greece, which I think would be the dream of any kid. And this trilogy, I've read 2 out of the 3 because I am saving the third, because the book just feels like lying back in the Mediterranean sun with the Mediterranean landscape and just all the wildlife there. It's mainly a memoir about just the experience of living somewhere like that, where the wildlife is so interesting, but also with the culture and the people. I think Greek culture is just wonderful. I love Greece. It's one of my favourite countries to visit. I haven't been back there in years though, but it's just a wonderful place with wonderful people. But it's also a story about growing up, and especially growing up as a child who was not particularly interested in schooling, but very, very interested in learning about wildlife and nature. And there are just so many eccentric characters who are all real in this book. And we get to meet them from a child's perspective, which I think it opens up some people more. They're a bit less reserved with a child. So it's like you get to look into their hearts a bit more. And that is how much I have left to go. So it's not a lot, but I'm going to save it for when I plan to go to Greece again, because it will make me very, very excited to go. Because that's one of my favourite things about visiting another country, especially a warm one, is that you just get such different wildlife compared to the UK. Although sometimes when I go down the canal I get very, very excited by seeing herons, because just the first time I saw one I was like, that is way too big and tropical looking a bird to live in the UK. It was just, but when I actually go somewhere that genuinely has like reptiles in abundance, I just love that. I went to Australia for the first time about a year and a half ago, and I was just in pieces all the time, because there are just, especially my favourite part is Queensland, and it's a bit more equatorial, it's very jungly, and there are just these massive and they just walk around the city like the city is still a jungle, and that just drives me crazy. But that's kind of getting off topic considering it was a book about Greece. And the last book I'm going to talk about, which is kind of sad because I've really enjoyed myself, and I hope that my rambling hasn't been too much. But the last one is The Scarlet Letter, and I haven't read this yet, even though I've wanted to, and I've had it for years, and even though it's so tiny. But if you've seen the film Easy A, then this is the book that is based on, but this is a lot older than that film in terms of its setting. So I will read the blurb, considering that I am not the best source of information on it because I have not read it. But I'm very much looking forward to when I actually do get the right surge of inspiration to read it. It should come relatively soon now because it's not like I've got all that many books on my to-be-read pile anymore, which I'm quite proud of because I used to be not only a prolific reader but a even more prolific book buyer, but I've stopped that now until I actually get through them. Fiercely romantic and hugely influential, The Scarlet Letter is the tale of Hester Prynne, imprisoned, publicly shamed and forced to wear a scarlet A for committing adultery and bearing an illegitimate child, Pearl. In their small Puritan village, Hester and her daughter struggle to survive, but in this searing study of the tension between private and public existence, Hester Prynne's inner strength and quiet dignity make her one of the first great heroines of American fiction. It's ironic that it's American fiction because this has Penguin English Library stamped on the front of it. But I guess that's just the styling and the collection that it's in. But yes, I'm very looking forward to reading that one. And if you have read this, let me know what you thought of it and a rating you would give it, so I know how high to place it on my priorities list. And feel free to do the same with any of the other books I've mentioned, although I admit that they are quite niche, so I will be both surprised and feel a kinship if you have read any of them. I suppose the Poppy War isn't niche actually, so maybe I'll have some hope there. But otherwise, tell me what you've been reading, the best book you've read recently, and anything you think that I might enjoy. And we can talk about books in the comments because, as you might have guessed, I love talking about books and reading books, hence the Lord of the Rings series, which is just such a treat for me because it doesn't require basically any preparation apart from setting up my setup, which does actually take quite a long time because I live in quite a small flat and I have to shift everything in order to film. But it's always worth it, obviously. I always enjoy it. But with The Lord of the Rings, I can kind of just get that done and there's no preparation for just reading. I just sit there, everything's set up, and I just fall into like a trance of reading, and I'm getting to enjoy a story and I'm getting to share it with you, and it's just the greatest feeling, yeah. So on that note, let me know if you think I should do a reading of those Greek myths or not. I know it might be might not have the largest audience, but if there's anyone. So I'll leave it there for today. Thank you for sitting with me, and I hope you're already asleep and not even listening to me right now. But if that wasn't your goal and your relax, de-stress, feel like you're